history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
Are you talking to me? Okay, from Nauset High? Okay.
So can you please state your full name and the community in which you now reside?
Carl M. Johnstone, Jr. And I was born in 1918, December 21. And I was born in Mississippi. And I don't know what age I was when this was going on, but I was pretty young, 22 or 3 or something like that. Okay, what else do you need?
When you were a kid, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Not really. My father, we were in the automobile business. I had a Ford agency in the small town. There were only 1,500 people that lived in this small town in Mississippi. And my growing up as a teenager, when I could drive, was Memphis, Tennessee was about 100 miles north of us on the Mississippi River. And in order to get our inventory for our automobile agency, they came down on a barge to Memphis, and we went up and drove them down to Calhoun City, 100 miles. And that was my job. And I'd bring down 4 or 5 or 6 units at the time. I'd take a bunch of boys over with me to drivers. It was only 100 miles down there, so that's the way that worked.
How did you end up on Cape Cod?
Daughter married a guy up here in Boston, and they had a home over on Cape Cod. So they finally talked us into coming out of Mississippi and moving up here, which we did several years ago. And that's what brought us to Cape Cod.
Do you enjoy living here now?
Huh?
Do you enjoy living here now?
Oh yes, very nice.
Can you please explain your favorite childhood memory when you were in Mississippi? Can you please explain your favorite childhood memory when you were in Mississippi?
My favorite? I think my favorite would be visiting my relatives, because we had relatives in the area. I had several cousins there, and they were always interested in entertaining me when I was around. So, and that's what I did.
What led for you to join the military? Were there any big things that happened that?
Well, I went to the University of Mississippi. I went to Ole Miss, and although we did not have a military unit in the university itself at the time, but immediately upon my graduation from Ole Miss, I went. I was in an area and at an age that I was going to be drafted and would have to go into the service on a draft. So instead, I elected to use the job we had down there and pick out basically what I wanted to do in the future. So that helped, and I didn't get caught in the middle. So this is all hazy. It happens a long ago, a long time ago.
So when you decided to go into the military, how did you tell your family, and what was their reaction?
Well, my dad was in World War One, so it wasn't anything necessary for him. My mother didn't like it. She didn't want me to go. That's normal.
Yeah, of course.
I was the only child, and they just wanted me to stay at home. But war prevailed, and I ended up and went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which was a proving ground at Fort Sill, and they had all of us. I was a second lieutenant by that time, and they had us out in the morning on a drill where we had to give us a target to shoot at, and we were firing 105 millimeter guns at it. And the night before, I had a cousin that lived in Chickasha, Oklahoma, which is about 25-30 miles from my home, and she had got together a bunch of her friends on a Sunday night and had me to come over and bring a friend of mine, and we had a party. Well, the party lasted all night. So by morning, I had to go to Fort Sill, so I came down there. It was only about 30 miles, and which made it easier. My dad was a Ford dealer, in other words, automobiles. So I always had a car. I had an automobile of my own, so that wasn't any problem. When I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and this was a staging area for overseas, and so I had my car, but I drove up to New Jersey to the staging area at Fort Sill and got loaded on the ship, and my dad came up and picked up the car later. I put it in storage right there. It was and next thing I knew, I was on my way to Casablanca.
So, what did you miss most while you were overseas?
What?
What did you miss the most while you were overseas?
Oh, I missed home cooking and family.
If you could relive one moment from the war, what would that be?
If
Yes, if you could.
one moment out of the war,
Yes.
well, if I could relive it, yeah. I had some buddies that got shot up with me, and I nursed them. One of them got shot in the head, and he was his neck was almost cut off, and I was holding him, actually, which was really a trauma affair. And there was a lot of things that happened about that time that were pretty bad. So I wouldn't want to relive any of them now.
Can you explain the happiest moment during the war that you experienced?
Well, when we were in North Africa at the time, there was a German general named Rommel, and he was in the area, and we saw him 2 or 3 times. I traveled when I was 18 years old. I did a lot of traveling in Europe, and I traveled. I went to Munich and I went to Stuttgart, and that was when Hitler was coming up. In other words, he was building the black shirts, and I saw him several times. I was close as we are to him 5 times. I could have killed him any time. I was right on the road in a parade. Having a parade in Stuttgart, having one in Munich, and had another one in Berlin. And I happened to be there in Stuttgart and in Munich. I was there, and I was close enough to him I could have hit him in the head. And knowing what I know now, I would have at that time. I'd have shot him. Because he became a bad cookie shortly after I got in the war, because it wasn't long till I saw him and we were fighting.
What was your ranking and how did you achieve it? So you said you were a second lieutenant?
Yeah, second lieutenant. And by the time I got to Fort Sill, I was a first lieutenant. And when I went overseas in Casablanca, this was a year later, I got promoted to captain. And then when I got out of the service, I was promoted to major, but that's what they do.
So what ranking is captain? What do you do as a captain?
I was provost marshal in Casablanca, which was a duty that we were camped outside of Casablanca there, about a mile, my unit, and we took turns of policing the area. And the main problem that we had was the free French all coming in, and they were coming in to get with the girls because there were a lot of them in Casablanca. And the biggest problem I had during that period of time, because I was provost marshal for Casablanca for about 2 weeks, and the biggest problem I had was getting these guys away from these gals. A lot of them were whores, and we had to drag them out and send them down to a prophylactic station and get them shot and send them over. So that happened. That happened a lot. So there was a lot of story there.
So you explained your happiest memory. What was the saddest, darkest memory that you have from the war?
The what? The dark?
Like the darkest.
The darkest?
Yeah.
I think probably when we made the landing at Point du Hoc in France, and several of my buddies got shot, some killed, some wounded, and were really in bad shape. Before I could get them out, get them back down, and get them to the medics, and all that, I was kind of paying nursemaid. So that was the worst part of mine, as I recall.
If you could change one thing you did in the war, what would it be and why?
If I could change it? Well, in retrospect, I had a chance to kill Hitler several times, 2 or 3 times. I was as close as this thing to him in parades that they were having for the black shirts. I don't know. I don't know if I had a gun at the time. If I had a gun, I had a revolver. But if I shot Hitler at that time, the early part of the war, think it would change the course of the war, really, because he was the one that was running the show. But that didn't happen. So, what was the question?
The next question.
What was that?
If you could change one thing from the war, what would it be and why?
If I what?
If you could change one thing from the war.
If I could change it, I would definitely change the stuff that happened at Point de Hope, where my close friends got killed.
Can you explain what happened when you arrived home after the war?
Explain what?
Can you explain what happened when you got back from the war with your family or anything?
Well, I was just like a lot of other servicemen. Yeah, took us a long time to get acclimated back in civilian life after being in the service. Because I'd been in there 3 years and pretty well got to be a soldier. So I think that was it. It just took a while settling down and living with it.
How did being a soldier affect your life after you were home, and what was like it? I'm sorry. How did being a soldier affect your life after you got home?
Well, I was given a lot of decorations, especially French, because we invaded France when I went in. When I went in with the Rangers, there was quite a lot of meetings that went on around my home and in that area, and they'd have dinners and all this, and a lot of people and talking, and they always wanted me to talk about what had happened. So I don't know where it would change anything or not, but that's just the way it was.
How does the war still affect you today?
The what?
How does the war still affect you today?
Well, for a long time, it affected me real bad. I got to where I couldn't sleep. I got to where I just couldn't sleep. And I finally got over that. Well, I would, because I saw so many people get killed, this stuff gets in your mind, and you think about it and dream about it, and at night you wake up and so that was the biggest problem.
What event had the most impact on you during the war?
What event? Well, there's so many of them. I don't know which which one would be the event.
You can explain all of them if you would like.
Huh?
You can explain all of them if you would like.
Well, I don't know. You have a lot of comeback stuff that you keep thinking about, and brings back a lot of the memories when they were fresh. It was over the first year or two after I got out of the service. But I don't know. I had to attend like a lot of the servicemen was always invited out for dinners and meetings and so forth, talk about the war.
When was the last time you were in touch with your friends from the war?
Oh, probably been 10 years since I've heard from any of my close friends out of the war, or the ones that are still living.
Did you have a best friend from the war? Did you have a really good group?
Well, I had we were pretty close knit, and we lived in these tents, you know, and we were thrown together all the time. So I don't know that I had any particular close friend, but those were the guys. But everybody's scattered, so I didn't keep up with them.
What was that like, having friends? Was it very important to be very close to each other during those times of struggle?
During the war?
Yes. Was it really important to be with each
Yeah,
other?
yeah, it really was, because at the time we were in Casablanca, and we were there for about a month before we got back into the war, and we lived in tents just outside of Casablanca, and that problem came up always, what am I going to eat and where? Because a lot of times we were on rations. In other words, we had what they called K rations back then, K and C rations. So we didn't have much food.
So what would make up those rations?
They had cookies and cakes and just standard ration. Nothing real good, but I mean, it was all edible, is what it was. We had a lot of that. And some of it we had tanks. I could eat my coffee, stick it over the tank engine. And I had 6 M3 tanks that were assigned to my unit, and had 105 millimeter guns on them. And
Are those large?
yeah,
Large?
yeah. And the tanks always gave us a heating place. In other words, cook the food, the rations and so forth. So I had a lot of it that was cooked on the back of a tank, on a tank engine.
If your grandchild came to you saying they're considering joining the military, what advice would you give them?
I would suggest, in case of an emergency, to join. Otherwise, stay out. That's my advice.
So like, what were like the living conditions like? Was it cold in the winter? Were you always warm? Were you always cold?
Cold. Most of the time.
Most of the time.
Yeah, we lived in tents, and some of the places where tents were bigger, we had 5 people to the tent, and we had a little burner deal in there that was supposed to keep us warm, but it really didn't work. Oh, yeah, and the rations at that time were pretty bad.
So you talked about seeing Hitler, thinking about all of his supporters there with him at the parades.
Hitler?
Hitler, yeah.
Yeah.
With all the supporters there at the parade,
Uh-huh.
at the parades. If you had the chance to go back in time and kill him, would you still do that?
I might. I had several opportunities. I had Munich and some other place, Stuttgart, and they were having these big black shirt parade where they were whipping up the signal for all the kids in Germany to fight, and they'd always have a parade, and I saw Hitler half a dozen times. I was close enough to kill him anytime. And I was sitting there on the side of the road like this, watching, because I traveled to Europe. I was over there I was 18 years old, and I just went over to spend the summer in Europe traveling. And this is when the war was just getting started. And that's where I saw Hitler. He was getting started too.
Yeah. So it wasn't really scary because you didn't know how much of a threat he was?
Huh?
So it wasn't really scary seeing him because you didn't know how much of a threat he was yet?
No, not at that time. We weren't in a war. It was before the war. It was right before the war.
Back to like living and there. What were the sleeping conditions in the tents?
Well, sleeping conditions were pretty bad, but I fortified it with, I had a sleeping bag that zipped up. A few guys did, most didn't, but I slept a little warmer than a lot of them because of that bag that I had.
In the war, was there any like time that you were so scared for your own sake?
Several times, yeah. I remember we were in I've forgotten where we were, but word came down that Rommel, the German general, and his staff and all were coming through that night, right close to where we were. And as I recall now, that was pretty bad, because we were pretty close. Anyway, we could see him, but that was it. He wasn't close enough.
So you said you drove tanks. What was your job in the tank?
Well, my job and what?
Inside the tanks. Like you said how your brigade had tanks. What did you do in the tank? Did you drive it or did you man a gun?
Well, no, we had tanks. We had M3 tanks, and had 6 of them in my unit, and we had jeeps that we actually rode in ourselves. But when we'd get anywhere close to the enemy and be advanced, we'd bring the tanks up, and they would do the firing, and we were close by, right by, and I got shot in Germany at one place, and shot in the groin, and the problem was that these Germans were hiding down in, they dig holes and have a camouflage deal over their head, and when you come by, they throw that thing off and come up and shoot. And So I was out. By that time I was a captain. I was firing, in other words, on the front, and I was shooting a lot of guns. We had a lot of, and I was talking directly to fire control and setting up the targets. And this German came out of this hole, threw off the deal, and I was out. I had a map in my hand, and I had a gun on my side, and a walkie-talkie. And I was talking, and he shot me right in the groin. In other words, right in my leg here, and came out my rear end here, and that ended my war right there.
So that brought you home?
Huh?
So did that injury bring you home?
Yeah, that ended my war right there.
What was that like for you?
That was pretty bad. I hated to leave because I got used to it.
Yeah. Was it a feeling of relief being able to go back home?
Well, it was, but I went to the big main hospital in Baltimore because of my wounds, and I was there 6 or 8 weeks, so it took a long time to get me patched up. And then they finally got me sewed up to where I could travel, and I caught a plane back down to Tennessee, down to my home. After that.
So after you got shot, where did they bring you from there?
Well, the first aid people were the first one there when I got shot, and they pulled me back right off the immediate front and to a first aid unit so that they could look after me, pat me up. Well, we were on the channel, the English Channel there. We weren't too far from it. So actually what they did was patch me up enough. They gave me a lot of penicillin, and back then that was a big deal, and kind of knocked me out because I was kind of in a haze, and loaded me on a raft, stretcher, and took me down to the sea, down to the channel, and I was loaded on a cruiser that took me across into England, and to the 99th General Hospital. In other words, they were just opening the hospital when I went in. That's how early it was in the war. So, and I was about the first patient they had. So from then on, it was, they worked on me there, and finally when I got in a condition where I could move or fly and get on a transport, then they flew me back to the U.S., flew me back to New Jersey, and then transferred me from there to a plane down to Memphis, to my home.
Well, thank you for your service, and thank you for having us here.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank you.
you boys. I hope it'll help.